For stalkers, happiness always wears the same face. To make it back alive, skirt the anomalies, stuff your pockets with loot, and cash out, that's the whole of the joy. But misfortune? That's different for everyone, because the zone is inventive and cooks up a special surprise for each of us. A stalker by the nickname of Guppy knew what happiness was. He'd been trampling the zone for 5 years now, remaining hale and hearty. But he didn't believe in luck. Guppy relied only on his knowledge of the terrain, the habits of mutants, and the golden rule: walk alone. People might sell you out to save their own hides, but a loner answers only to himself. Guppy never pledged allegiance to clans, never nursemaided rookies or tourists, and never took contract hits. He simply vanished into the zone, crawled into the deadliest hellholes, and returned with a container packed with the rarest artifacts. He didn't drink, smoke, or gamble. His singular, insurmountable vice was real, fresh-brewed coffee. He brewed it everywhere, even in the deep zone, ignoring warnings that the scent drew mutants and marauders like flies to honey. Guppy was damn cautious about everything else, but he just couldn't give up the coffee. This time, Guppy set up camp in a reliable stash near Lake Yantar. It was a spot shielded from the psychotropic emissions of the local radar. A former entrance to military bunkers collapsed from the inside. Guppy got a small fire going, set an old tin pot on the flames, and savored the aroma as it overpowered the stench of swamp rot. He was satisfied. The raid had been a success. In his containers lay singing springs, segments of a chain, dragon's eyes, and a briquette of doom mummy. Tucked in his pack was a capsule of dead water, painstakingly collected from a bush with a special dropper. The day had passed quietly, barring a scuffle with a German zombie that he'd had to decapitate with his machete. Guppy planned to wait out the night, catch a few winks, and head for the scientists and traders come morning. The idyll was shattered by a drawn-out moan from the direction of the lake. An invisible, dead stalker began pleading pitifully for help. Guppy knew it was a phantom's trap to lure people into the mire, so he just spat on the ground and went back to his coffee. He took the pot off the fire, poured a cup, downed it, and reached for a refill. The moment his hand touched the handle, a shadow flickered in the entryway. Guppy didn't have time to react. A powerful, springy blow to the chest hurled him against the wall. The coffee spilled onto the embers, hissing and filling the cramped space with intoxicating steam. Guppy landed on his side, but immediately snatched up his rifle. He clicked on the underbarrel flashlight. The beam snatched a gray, shapeless something out of the darkness where nothing had been a second before. The stalker didn't ask questions. He squeezed the trigger. A short burst tore through the silence. The creature, it turned out to be a Burer, a telekinetic dwarf, sprang to its feet. The little freak threw up its stubby hands, trying to summon its power. It tried to lift a concrete slab to hurl at the human, but the block merely twitched and slumped back down. Then the Burer directed its energy at Guppy. The stalker was pinned to the wall by an invisible press, but the pressure was weak. Guppy calmly took aim and unloaded the entire magazine into the dwarf until the bolt clicked dry. Reloading his weapon, Guppy cautiously approached the fallen enemy. The Burer was still alive, but behaving oddly. Usually, these beasts didn't creep into human shelters. Guppy flipped the dwarf over with his boot and saw a gaping, old, already scabbed bullet wound in the freak's temple. It became clear. The Burer hadn't crawled into the stash to hunt, but to hide, and perhaps stash something away. Dying, the dwarf convulsively clutched a hand to its chest beneath its rags. Guppy slammed his rifle butt into its temple to silence it for good, then began searching the reeking tatters. Under layers of filthy clothing, he found an army PDA belonging, judging by the markings, to a Belgian soldier from the perimeter guard. The screen was smashed, the device dead. Guppy realized the Bureau had stolen the gadget, caught a bullet, fled, and died here trying to protect its shiny prize. Smirking at the mutant's stupidity, Guppy tossed the useless PDA into the fire. The plastic began to melt, the casing cracked, and a flash drive popped out of a hidden slot. This piqued the Stalker's interest. He fished the flash drive out of the fire, let it cool, and slotted it into his own PDA. The drive was clean of viruses and contained a single image file. A strange labyrinth schematic opened on the screen. A tangle of lines, red and green dots, question marks at the nodes, and a black square in the very center. The picture resembled a child's Find the Path puzzle, where several entrances lead to dead ends, and only one leads to the goal. Guppy traced one of the lines with his eyes, and, sure enough, it hit the black square. Deciding the military was just amusing themselves out of boredom by drawing nonsense rebuses, Guppy gave a disappointed grunt. He chalked it up to another whim of people who lacked a real dream. Twirling the flash drive in his fingers, he tossed it back into the fire, destroying the find. Outside, the dead stalker howled again, begging for help and complaining of thirst. Guppy rudely told the phantom where to go. The dead stalker prowled around the hideout all night, wearing Guppy down with its endless, mournful wailing. Guppy regretted that he had no rounds left for his trophy grenade launcher. Otherwise, he would have certainly fired at the phantom, purely for moral satisfaction and to settle his nerves. Only near morning did the phantom pipe down. Guppy didn't even bother watching it take its habitual walk across the water of Lake Yantar, stepping on the roofs of submerged cars before dissolving into the fog. The stalker gathered his gear, meticulously extinguished the fire, and crawled out. He carefully swept away the tracks left from dragging the Bureau's corpse and blocked the entrance to the shelter with an old snag so that an outsider could pass 2 steps away and notice nothing. Guppy spat over his left shoulder to avoid meeting a fool, but the superstition failed. He hadn't gone 2 kilometers toward the scientific camp when he stumbled upon a madman. A man in a light blue bodysuit, the kind scientists wear under their hazmat suits, was wandering near the water with a blissful smile, collecting dry grass. Guppy realized immediately this was another egghead driven insane by the psychotropic emissions of the lake. Usually, such types are visited by the ghosts of dead relatives. Guppy called out to the lunatic. The man frightenedly clutched his bouquet to his chest. It turned out the madman understood Russian. He was Felix Strauch from Biarritz, France. He explained that he was gathering flowers for Denise, who had called him to the lake. When Guppy asked when Denise had died, the Frenchman replied that it was 3 years ago, yet continued to insist she was alive. Guppy, eyeing a reward for returning a fugitive, decided to play along. He told him they were in Wonderland, where anything is possible, and that Denise had changed her mind, sending the stalker to bring Felix to her. The Frenchman happily agreed. They moved along the path. Ahead, Guppy noticed a crushed log, splintered as if stepped on by a giant. It looked suspicious. The detector was silent, so the stalker decided to play it safe. He stopped the Frenchman, pulled out a heavy, rusty bolt, and tossed it into the area of the suspected anomaly. The bolt landed normally. Guppy ordered Felix to walk exactly where the bolt had fallen. The Frenchman walked over,
picked up the bolt and joyfully showed it to the Stalker. Guppy took the bolt back and let the madman take point, using him as a living mine detector, though he relied more on his own memory of the terrain. Suddenly, Felix darted off the path and through the bushes. Guppy cursed and ran after him. The Frenchman fell to his knees before a huge, bright scarlet flower with a fleshy stem. Guppy had never seen anything like it, and immediately shouted for him not to touch the plant. He tried to explain to the lunatic that the flowers here were alive and dangerous, but Felix, enchanted by his find, reached out and touched a petal. The bud instantly came to life, swayed, and spat a viscous, milky white mass into the scientist's face. The Frenchman tried to scream, but the slime glued his mouth shut. The petals unfolded, shot out sticky threads, and tightly engulfed the victim's head. Guppy knew he should run, but greed overpowered him. He didn't want to lose the money for the botanist. The stalker dropped to one knee and severed the flower's stem at the root with a burst from his rifle. Felix toppled onto his side, clutching his head, which was plastered with petals. Guppy grabbed him by the legs and dragged him back to the path, away from the bushes. He suspected it was a mimic mutant, which had assumed the form of a flower plucked from the victim's consciousness.
After looking around and checking his detector, only a couple of cowardly fleshes were lurking nearby. Guppy tended to the wounded man. There was a pulse. The petals on the Frenchman's head began to turn black. Guppy pried them up with his knife and started peeling them off. Beneath them, a gruesome sight was revealed. The mutant's digestive juices, containing a potent anesthetic, had already eaten away the face. The skin had sloughed off, exposing the bones of the cheekbones and forehead. The lips were reduced to tatters, and in place of eyes were bloody hollows. Felix felt no pain due to the anesthesia. Guppy splashed the last of the water from his canteen onto the man's face to wash away the acid, then donned a rubber glove and scooped the slime out of his mouth so he wouldn't suffocate. The stalker jerked the mutilated Frenchman to his feet and drove him forward, prodding him with the barrel of his rifle. The fleshes trailed them, drawn by the scent of fresh blood and death. Somewhere to the right, the detector picked up a large target, possibly a young bloodsucker, but it hesitated to attack. Guppy hurried. Soon, the concrete fence of the scientific camp appeared, complete with watchtowers and barbed wire. A guard on a tower spotted them and waved toward the airlock. Right at the entrance, the anesthetic wore off. Felix began to scream wildly and bash his head against the armored airlock door. Guppy pinned him down. "Into the video sensor for them to open up faster!" The guards above just suggesting the stalker shoot the sufferer himself, but Guppy refused to waste his ammo. A pack of blind dogs was already picking up their trail. Finally, the green light flared and the door slid open. Inside the airlock, they were met by two men in yellow bioprotection suits. Guppy shoved the blind and screaming Felix inside. The scientists immediately wrestled their colleague onto a gurney, swaddled him in film, and wheeled him into the complex without a word of thanks to the stalker. One of them simply swept a radiation detector over Guppy and opened the inner door to the camp. The stalker didn't care. He was only interested in the payment for the laboratory's returned property. The place where the scientists lived and worked, guarded by the military, had long ceased to be a mere campsite of tents and trailers. Now it was a bona fide fortified stronghold, capable of withstanding a long siege, a miniature city with its own infrastructure. It was here that Guppy met Stephen, the deputy head of science, a short blonde man in glasses and a blue jumpsuit. Stephen immediately inquired about the hall, and Guppy shook the container. The scientist expressed disbelief upon seeing only a couple of chains and springs,
suspecting the stalker was holding back the prime loot. Guppy didn't deny it, but stated flatly that the rest of the swag wasn't for sale to the eggheads. They headed to Stephen's office to discuss the deal without the soldiers, who were warming their ears nearby, overhearing. En route, Guppy reminded him of the debt for saving the mad Frenchman, Felix. Stephen, who spoke excellent Russian, initially feigned ignorance, but then asked for details. Guppy described the strange mimic mutant in the form of a giant flower that read the victim's memory. Instead of horror, the deputy of science showed professional interest. He lamented that such specimens only reached them dead and daydreamed about acquiring a live controller. Guppy called him crazy and advised him to contact the swamp doctor, but the scientists had already tried to negotiate with the zone's legend and had been told exactly where to shove it due to differences in opinion regarding the nature of the local hell. Passing the barracks and the vivarium, Guppy asked about women, but Stephen curtly replied that there were no women in the camp. They ascended the external staircase to the second floor of the administration building and entered the office. Guppy was habitually surprised by the presence of a leather sofa in such a backwater. He dropped his backpack and rig and made small talk about daily life, discovering that the scientists even had their disposable socks imported. Then they got down to business. Stephen produced a special cylinder made of leaded glass for receiving artifacts. Guppy poured in the springs and the chain segments. The springs remained silent, unwilling to sing for the scientist, and the chains looked sluggish. Stephen began to inspect the goods critically, hinting at the need to check the artifact's activity, though Guppy never brought empties. While the scientist was busy with the appraisal, Guppy asked to arrange a bunk for him in the barracks. Stephen again offered the Stalker contract work, but was refused. Guppy had no desire to become a guinea pig. Then the conversation turned to payment. Stephen admitted the goods brought in weren't worth much and complained about glitchy scanners. Guppy demanded to see something worthwhile. The scientist hesitated, then produced a nickel-plated box. Inside lay a black disc with indicators and nodules, the newest Army diagnostic medkit, the HL-22, equipped with artificial intelligence. Stephen explained that the device diagnosed shock or poisoning on its own and injected the necessary cocktail of drugs through microneedles. Guppy immediately appreciated the utility of the item and tried to barter for it with his springs and a dozen cartridges thrown in. Stephen was outraged by such cheek, declaring the device unique and one of only 25 in existence. He demanded the contents of the second container, the dragon's eyes and the doom mummy, in exchange. Guppy refused, as he was saving that loot for the trader Toad, who paid better. Stephen tried to appeal to his conscience, saying that hucksters profited from sick people by reselling medicine at triple the price, and pleaded for material for Dr. Fredrickson's research. But Guppy was adamant. The medkit was good, but not worth being left without money for ammo and gear. Then Stephen played his trump card. He offered the medkit and a huge sum of money, not for artifacts, but for a special mission. The scientists wanted to shut down the Psi radar on Lake Yantar and were looking for a guide to lead a military group into the catacombs. They had even developed a prototype protective helmet. Upon hearing this, Guppy categorically refused. He knew the underground teemed with Bureaus, and going down there with a squad of soldiers who only knew how to shout, "Yes, sir," was suicide. Neither the money nor the offer of amnesty interested him. He abruptly cut off the persuasion, demanded standard payment in cash and dry rations for the Frenchman, and, leaving his gear in the office under supervision, went off to sleep, taking a final jab at the disappointed scientist on his way out.
In the zone, you can never fully relax. Even sleep, for a stalker, carries the risk of never waking up. However, the scientific camp was an exception, a fortress where Guppy allowed himself 4 hours of shut-eye on a bunk in the barracks. He didn't strip down, only removing his boots. He woke a minute before his PDA timer buzzed and immediately checked the news network. The feed was routine. A shootout in the Sin clan, Monolith fighters missing in action, a blind dog attack, and yet another death of the stalker Semetsky in the Rusty Forest. Guppy cleaned himself up, washed his face, made his bed, and noted that the local soldiers never smiled, as if they felt death lurking around every corner. Time was tight. He needed to reach the Stalker bar before dark. Guppy headed to Stephen's office, but the door was locked. He waited on the gallery, watching the camp. Soon, the deputy head of science appeared, bringing the Stalker lunch in an aluminum mess tin. It was real homemade food, meat goulash with beans and, most importantly, a cup of fresh-brewed, non-instant coffee. While Guppy ate with relish, Stephen grilled him about the found Frenchman, Felix. The scientist was interested in whether the madman had been alone. Upon receiving an affirmative answer, Stephen admitted that 2 of their soldiers had gone missing. Guppy recalled the fresh zombie with a bazooka he'd killed yesterday, but that one had been in a German uniform, while the camp was guarded by American Marines. Stephen paid for the Frenchman's rescue with an envelope of dollars. Guppy counted the cash, packed the leftover dry rations into his backpack, and reminded him that he'd be taking the artifacts to the trader Toad, his main investor. Leaving, the stalker grabbed the empty mess tin from the table to dispose of the trash and said his goodbyes. Running out of the administration building, Guppy checked his loot. Along with the dirty dishes, he had subtly swiped the very same HL-22 Advanced Army Injector medkit from the table, the one Stephen had demanded an exorbitant price or a suicidal underground trek for. The stalker's conscience was clear. He simply took what he needed. On his way to the exit, Guppy tossed the mess tin through the washroom window. At that moment, a young, ginger-haired American scientist with a camera ran up to him, begging for a souvenir photo with a real stalker. Instead of posing, Guppy, wearing the grim smile of a man who has seen death, suggested the kid step outside the gates and take the picture there, against the backdrop of the zone. The terrified American, stammering that it was dangerous out there, ran away in horror. At the checkpoint, the soldier in the tower warned that burnt fuzz was flying. Guppy thanked him, fastened his helmet, and draped a dense mosquito mesh over his face. He pulled long rubber gloves onto his hands, securing them with elastic bands. Scarcely had he stepped beyond the perimeter when a clump of burnt fuzz struck his face, but the mesh saved his skin from the chemical burn. His detector showed activity: a pack of blind dogs to the east, wandering fleshes, and scattered zombies. Guppy moved cautiously through the thickets, which were draped in rusty fluff, stepping over silver-gray grass. He decided to skirt the southern shore of Lake Yantar, adhering to the rule that, in the zone, you never return the same way you came. Guppy emerged onto a secret trail, a route he and his partner Mosquito had marked with signs, as new anomalies rarely formed there. The signs were in place, and the stalker quickly covered several kilometers. Ahead lay an abandoned quarry filled with rusty machinery, where detectors worked poorly and bloodsuckers liked to hide. Guppy began his descent down a slope overgrown with ugly trees and bushes plastered with fuzz, looking like giant toxic dandelions. The detector pinged a group of 5 targets ahead,
identifying them as zombies. Guppy didn't fear them. He even pitied them, preferring to bypass rather than kill. He readied his rifle, brushed the sticky fuzz from his face mesh, and called out to the hiding figures to clear the road. But instead of a mindless moan, a crisp command rang out from behind the trees. "Lower the weapon, Stalker. Take one step, and you're dead."
Guppy realized he'd walked into an ambush by trusting the device. The display showed 5 blips, a standard group, a guide, an assistant, and 3 rookies. But they had fanned out, and Guppy found himself in their crosshairs. He identified himself, but a voice with a foreign accent ordered him to drop his weapon. Arguing with 5 barrels was pointless. Guppy deliberately moved slowly, placing his rifle on the ground, unbuckling his holster belt, and, fumbling until the 3rd try, unfastening the carabiner of his backpack and shedding his rig with the grenades. As he did so, he suggested the invisible men look for more weapons themselves. A smirk, resembling a scar, made the enemies hesitate. Guppy tried to seize the initiative by asking about the attackers' problems, but from behind ordered him to raise his hands. He was professionally frisked, losing his knife and a concealed stiletto. Guppy was ordered to step away from his gear. 2 fighters in camouflage and full-face helmets, looking like Imperial stormtroopers and armed with M21 rifles, stepped out from behind the trees. Behind the Stalker stood a Monolith fighter, which was unbelievable. That clan usually sat tight in Pripyat, guarding the center of the zone. Another Monolith fighter appeared, and the 5th turned out to be a member of the Sin clan, nicknamed Werewolf. Wearing an old tanker's helmet, armed with a shotgun, his face crisscrossed with scars. The company was as strange and motley as they came. American Marines, fanatics from Pripyat, and a cultist. The American threw the melted carcass of a PDA at Guppy's feet. The Stalker recognized the gadget he had burned the night before and realized this group had been watching his stash. The Sinner, Werewolf, accused Guppy of causing the death of his friend, nicknamed Salo, who had fallen into a witch's jelly trap in the Stalker's hideout. Guppy remarked that they shouldn't have been crawling into other people's holes. It turned out Salo had gone blind, and his friends had simply shot him as a burden. This entire ragtag gang was hunting for the flash drive from that PDA. Guppy honestly admitted he had burned it, mistaking the contents for a child's maze game. The Monolith fighters, if he had seen the file, he had memorized the map. Ricochet, the leader of the Monolith duo, explained to the others that Guppy was a unique stalker with a phenomenal memory, capable of reproducing the map from his mind. Werewolf wanted to shoot the prisoner, but Ricochet reined him in, stating that Guppy was their only chance. Guppy confirmed he remembered the map, but refused to draw it, realizing that the moment he did, they would kill him. He pointed out that the Sinner was dreaming of putting a bullet in his back, while he himself could sell the information to others. Ricochet agreed and issued an ultimatum. Guppy was coming with them to the CNPP. The conversation was interrupted by the attack of a flesh springing from the bushes. Werewolf blasted it in the snout, and the beast fled. After that, the dialogue resumed. Guppy tried to refuse, but Ricochet made it clear there was no choice. They revealed their hand. They possessed a detailed plan of the underground communications beneath the sarcophagus, acquired by the Sinners in an old Sea Consciousness Project bunker. This map was the key to the legendary Monolith, the Wish Granter. The Americans, Sergeants Shrek and Gates, sharing a surname with Bill, turned out to be the very missing soldiers Stephen had spoken of. They possessed experimental protection against psi emissions, which would allow the group to pass through the deadly red forest. The Monolith fighters, Ricochet and Fly, turned out to be instructors from the camp in the Dark Valley who knew the way. The entire group consisted of deserters and outcasts, dreaming of reaching the Monolith and granting their wishes. Assessing the situation, Guppy realized they would kill him if he refused. He decided to pretend he agreed to participate in this crusade for happiness, hoping to escape along the way. Of the legend of the Monolith, and remembering that in the original story, Roadside Picnic by the Strugatsky brothers, the wish machine brought happiness to no one, he nonetheless refrained from voicing his thoughts aloud.
Guppy reached for his assault rifle, but Ricochet confiscated the weapon, declaring that the Stalker would only get it back in the dead city once he had proven his loyalty. Guppy, knowing full well that walking unarmed was suicide, tried to object, but Ricochet stood his ground, arguing it was for the group's safety. Guppy had to agree. He shouldered his backpack and fell into the column behind the Americans. Ricochet brought up the rear. Fly walked point, leading the group competently, skirting dangerous areas and striving to avoid anomalies. Guppy noted his professionalism, a sharp contrast to the rookie probes the group had picked up along the way. The three young stalkers, Chatterbox, Elephant, and Fondue, were cocky and well-equipped, but completely unprepared for the zone. Fly immediately schooled them with his fists, explaining the basic rules of survival. The group moved toward the Red Forest via the Dead City, as the route through the army warehouses was closed due to a conflict between the Sinners and the locals. Guppy planned to escape in the Dead City once the inevitable firefight broke out, then make his way to the army warehouses and sell the group out. Along the way, they returned fire against dogs and fleshes. One of the rookies, Chatterbox, fell victim to a zombie that attacked him from behind. Ricochet and Fly used the situation as a lesson for the others, forcing the rookies to finish off a second zombie. Chatterbox, bitten on the cheek, was in a panic, terrified of turning into a zombie. But Guppy calmed him down, explaining that it was merely an infection. The squad approached a field overgrown with strange, violet vegetation, resembling mutated hemp. Guppy sensed danger, but Ricochet brushed off his warnings, relying on his detector. Suddenly, a giant mutant boar burst from the thicket and attacked Ricochet. The Monolith fighter dodged, and the group opened fire. Guppy, seizing the moment amidst the chaos, dashed over to Fly, where his backpack with the weapons lay. While the stalkers were finishing off the first boar, a second one flew out of the bushes, chasing the rookie Elephant. The beast trampled the fallen boy and lunged at the others. Guppy, instead of fleeing, hurled a modified grenade filled with adhesive foam at the boar. It entangled the beast, binding its movements. Guppy coolly slit the mutant's throat with his machete. The American, Shrek, identified the grenade as a non-lethal G8, but was surprised that the foam hardened so quickly. Guppy explained that it was a modification by a stalker named Gilza. After the fight, Guppy took advantage of the moment to reclaim his tactical rig and rifle. No one, not even Ricochet, stood in his way, and Fly even handed him spare magazines, acknowledging Guppy's contribution to saving the group. Guppy realized something was wrong when their guide, Fly, started getting nervous and losing the trail, as if something was preventing him from leading the group straight. Ricochet, the Monolith leader, noticed it too and sent Werewolf to the rear guard. The group passed the former hemp field with its mutated plants and emerged at an abandoned fruit nursery, where poisonous berries grew and craters gaped open, lined with glowing moss. Suddenly, Ricochet stopped the squad and announced that the bus where they had planned to spend the night had vanished. Werewolf, not mincing words, tore into Ricochet, demanding explanations. The conflict nearly escalated into a shootout. Fly drew a bead on the Sinner, but Guppy intervened, putting a pistol to Fly's head and defusing the situation. It became clear that the Monolith fighters had never actually been to this place,
and were leading the men to a point they knew only by hearsay. Guppy realized their expertise was a myth, and the group had been dragged into a dangerous gamble. The situation was aggravated by the fact that very little daylight remained. Guppy took the initiative, ordering everyone to dig in. Using entrenching tools, the group excavated a shelter in the center of an old crater, reinforcing it with a parapet of the glowing moss. Guppy assigned watch shifts and issued instructions: make no noise, use no lights, and shoot at any shadow crossing the glowing ring. During the preparations, Werewolf confessed to Guppy that the map was genuine, from a secret military archive, and led to the Monolith, which had been the target of the Sea Consciousness Project. The Sinner turned out not to be a fanatic, but a cynical outcast with simply nothing left to lose. Guppy began to feel a peculiar respect for him. In the night, Guppy woke to the sound of gunfire. A pack of 30 blind dogs had attacked the camp. They acted in an organized fashion, controlled by an alpha, a black Chernobyl dog. The dogs circled the trench, waiting for the moment to launch a coordinated assault. Guppy, understanding the alpha's tactics, ordered lights out to avoid attracting more beasts, but Ricochet panicked and switched on his flashlight, blinding everyone. Guppy knocked him out with a butt stroke, regaining control of the situation. The Stalker devised a plan. Distract the pack by allowing one dog to jump into the trench, where Werewolf would deal with it, while the others beat back the rest. Meanwhile, Guppy and the American Shrek headed into the darkness to hunt the telepathic alpha. Using the empty mind technique taught to him by the Swamp Doctor, Guppy managed to get close to the black dog. Shrek, who also knew meditation techniques, covered him. They fired their underbarrel grenade launchers in sync, gravely wounding the mutant, then finished it off with a barrage of fire. Shrek emptied a pistol magazine into the corpse, just to be sure. However, immediately after their victory, a bloodsucker attacked them, materializing behind Shrek's back. Guppy saved the American by unleashing a burst right over his shoulder into the monster's mug. Falling, Shrek managed to shoot the creature in the gut, but the bloodsucker ripped the rifle from his hands and smashed it, then vanished, cloaking itself to regenerate. Guppy hauled up the concussed Shrek, and they sprinted back to the trench, racing against the invisible hunter.
After the death of the Alpha, the pack of blind dogs lost coordination and soon scattered, leaving the group alone. Werewolf, cursing, discovered that the dog he had been wrestling with had managed to piss on him. The Stalkers checked the perimeter. Shrek boasted that they had winged the bloodsucker, but Guppy warned that a wounded mutant wouldn't charge the trench. It would go to ground and start hunting come morning. The rest of the night passed in dampness and cold under a drizzling rain. Guppy, whose watch came just before dawn, hatched a plan. He wanted to slip away unnoticed while Fly was on guard, taking weapons, ammo, and meds, but ditching the heavy backpack of artifacts. However, this plan collapsed when he realized the wounded, angry bloodsucker was lurking somewhere very close. Standing alone against such a beast with just one rifle was impossible, so Guppy was forced to stick with the squad. In the morning, while the others slept, Guppy ate a tin of self-heating rations. When the camp woke, it became clear the rookies were in terrible shape. Chatterbox, bitten by the zombie, had a badly inflamed cheek. Fly, checking the wound, brutally ripped off the bio-glue film, accused the kid of lying, and forced Fondue to sew up the festering gash. Elephant, injured by the boar, could barely walk due to broken ribs and a smashed knee. Ricochet pulled Guppy aside, and they cynically discussed the wounded man's fate. Ricochet wanted to ditch the deadweight, but Guppy suggested placing Elephant at the tail of the column, as a sacrifice for the pursuing bloodsucker, so it would eat its fill and back off. Ricochet loudly approved the plan, ensuring everyone heard what a brain Guppy was. Before moving out, Guppy noticed a zombie sitting nearby and tossed him a pack of crackers. The group formed up.
Fly on point, followed by Chatterbox, Guppy, Ricochet, and at the tail, the limping elephant, relieved of his load and even his rifle. Guppy's detector showed they were now being tracked not by one, but by two bloodsuckers. The beasts were working in a pair. Fly led the squad, skirting clusters of discharger anomalies, and brought the group to an abandoned farmstead. There was no avoiding this place. Fields of creeping mold and bushes draped in strange blue webbing stretched all around. The farmstead looked suspiciously quiet. Guppy scanned the yard. A listing house, a rotten porch, and a well. His attention was drawn to the handle of the well's windlass. It gleamed, as if polished by frequent touching. Guppy halted the group and ordered Elephant to go to the well for recon. The wounded boy walked obediently, like a man condemned, but stopped before a wide drainage ditch, unable to jump it with his bad leg. Ricochet started yelling at him, but Guppy intervened and ordered another man sent. The choice fell on Chatterbox. He dropped his pack, hopped the ditch, and, rifle at the ready, slowly approached the log frame. Guppy shouted for him not to touch anything, but it was too late. The moment Chatterbox got close, a formless, transparent substance, like liquid glass, surged up from the well. It refracted the light, distorting the outlines of objects. The creature crashed down, blanketed the rookie, and instantly engulfed him like a giant amoeba. Chatterbox, suspended upside down inside the transparent mass, managed to pull the trigger. The rifle fired greenish discharges, and the barrel covered in cracks. The glassy mass began to flow out of the well, filling the yard and spilling over the ditch. Guppy yelled, "Run!" and was the first to bolt, outstripping even the guide. Elephant, frozen in horror, hesitated. Guppy ran, vaulting obstacles, and heard a drawn-out, inhuman scream behind him, but didn't look back. He flew over a hillock, hit the grass, and readied his weapon. Fly tumbled down next to him. The others had lagged behind. Guppy crawled up the rise and checked the road with his binoculars. There lay the flattened body of Elephant with twisted limbs. In his panic, the kid had run straight into a gravitational anomaly. Soon, Ricochet, Werewolf, Shrek, and Fondue caught up. The group had lost 2 men. Through the binoculars, Guppy saw movement in the bushes near the farmstead. It was the young bloodsucker. The monster emerged onto the road and headed toward Elephant's corpse, intending to dine. But reaching a paw toward the body, the bloodsucker triggered the same gravitational trap. A crunch echoed out. The invisible force snapped the mutant's limb at a right angle. The beast howled and retreated back into the bushes. Ricochet pounced on Guppy, blaming him for Chatterbox's death. But the stalker replied coldly that if not for the check, the creature would have engulfed the whole group at once. When Gates asked what kind of thing had been in the well, Guppy replied that he had no idea and warned the deeper into the zone, the worse the nightmares.
One of the bloodsuckers, having fallen into the gravitational trap, was left behind. But the second continued the pursuit, flickering in and out on the edge of the detector's display. Guppy explained to his companions that the mutant thirsted for revenge for the night skirmish and would only back off in the dead city, where there were plenty of zombies, meat too rotten for its taste. Scarcely had the group emerged from the rotten forest when 3 black Apache Army helicopters appeared on the horizon, flying straight at them. Ricochet panicked and ordered a retreat back into the woods, but Guppy and Werewolf flatly refused to backtrack, knowing that in the zone, retracing your steps meant certain death. The Americans backed the Stalker, and the group continued moving toward the choppers. The roar of the rotors grew, pressing on their ears,
but suddenly the machines vanished, dissolving into the sky. Guppy surmised it was a temporal anomaly, or a mirage, and harshly berated Ricochet for attempting to violate the rules of the zone. The squad approached the territory of an abandoned farm, enclosed by a concrete fence. The slab walls were covered in a web of cracks oozing a silvery liquid, with translucent, glass-like threads stretching toward the men. A frightening silence reigned. Fly, Walking Point, stumbled over a skeleton in decayed clothing, wearing a Duty Clan bandana. The corpse lay in an unnatural pose, arms thrown behind its head, elbows pointing at the horizon. Guppy looked in the indicated direction and saw that the horizon line was curved upward, resembling a bowl. Sensing the mortal danger of a gigantic anomaly, the Stalker immediately ordered a retreat along the fence, and the group obeyed without question. The only path lay through an old cattle yard overgrown with tall wormwood. A toppled water tower lay across the yard. Guppy noticed the handle of the well's windlass was unnaturally polished, but they didn't stop to investigate. The Stalker chose the last remaining rookie, Fondue, and forced him to go first, probing the path with bolts. The boy was afraid, but Guppy smacked him in the face to bring him to his senses and made him put on a respirator as the wormwood was shedding abundant pollen. Fondue advanced slowly, and the radiation levels began to rise rapidly. Deep in the yard, Guppy spotted movement. Checking his binoculars with infravision, he saw a pseudo-giant. The huge carcass was swaying strangely back and forth. It soon became clear the monster wasn't alone. 3 fleshes and several armed zombies stepped out behind it. The entire entourage moved with unnatural synchronicity. They were being led by a controller. Guppy ordered everyone to ready their underbarrel grenade launchers for a simultaneous volley at the giant's knees. But at that moment, the group made a mistake, focusing on the visible threat and forgetting their rear. The invisible bloodsucker that had been tracking them attacked from the tall grass. It materialized right in front of Werewolf, and both roared. The monster knocked the sinner down, pinning him to the earth despite a point-blank buckshot blast. Gates struck the beast with his rifle butt, and Ricochet slashed its throat with a knife. The wounded bloodsucker hurled the Monolith leader aside and swiped at Shrek, shredding his body armor. Fly threw a knife to Ricochet, while Fondue lay on the ground, covering his head with his arms. In the chaos of the fight, Guppy noticed the pseudo-giant was approaching, but not toward the humans. The massive mutant walked up to the grappling bloodsucker and werewolf. It gently prodded the bloodsucker with a claw. Enraged, the bloodsucker abandoned the human and lunged at the giant. A battle of monsters erupted. The bloodsucker, dodging blows from the powerful paws, slashed the giant's snout with its talons, while the giant tried to trample its agile opponent. Eventually, the pseudo-giant knocked the bloodsucker off its feet, clamped its beak-like maw onto the creature's stomach, and began to shake it. The zombies and fleshes watched the fight, ignoring the humans. The controller had shifted its attention to the clash of the beasts. Werewolf, seizing the moment, crawled out from under the brawl, covered in the bloodsucker's black blood, and lit a cigarette. Guppy realized this was their only chance. He hauled Fondue up and drove him toward the passage under the toppled water tower. The probe ran, but the Stalker saw that atop the tower, directly above the passage, sat the controller itself. A humanoid monster with dark brown skin. In desperation, Guppy shouted at it, asking what it wanted. The controller leaned down and unexpectedly waved a hand, letting the squad pass. Guppy shoved Fondue forward, and the whole group dashed under the tower, fleeing the anomalies and monsters.
As soon as Fondue, running first, crossed the invisible line, the air rippled. Guppy, rushing in after him, felt the world flip over. Space distorted, and they tumbled out onto a large, semicircular clearing. Here, bright orange grass grew, and dead trees draped in rusty bast and cobwebs stood all around. The entire group, including the blood-smeared werewolf, was present. The stunned stalkers tried to understand where they were. Guppy, dropping his backpack, declared he wouldn't take another step until he had some coffee. Guppy sat on the orange grass in the middle of the clearing, where the spatial anomaly had spewed them out, drinking fresh brewed coffee. He categorically refused to budge until he finished this ritual. Ricochet was fuming, while the others ate dry rations and collected themselves. Fly, determined by his instruments that they had been thrown to the west, very close to the dead city, about a 40-minute walk. Guppy realized the way back was cut off. Now he would have to go with the group to the bitter end, hoping to reach Pripyat and strike a deal with the Monolith. When the coffee was finished, the squad moved out, deciding against the sewers, which were likely mined, in favor of crossing the city on the surface. The group approached the outskirts of the dead city at dusk. They lay prone under a rusty fuel truck and began observation. The city was teeming with zombies, but they were behaving strangely. The dead were mimicking human life. Some were buying trash in shattered storefronts, others were talking, and still others were trying on old clothes. Sniper gates immediately spotted the ambush. Rifle barrels were protruding from the windows of the buildings. Snipers from the Freedom faction controlled the perimeter, herding victims into the city center. With the onset of darkness, the squad moved forward, using the last rookie, Fondue, as a live anomaly detector and bait. Fondue crawled toward a thorny bush, which turned out to be a carnivorous mutant. The plant's roots lunged at the boy, entangling his arms and legs. Guppy and Werewolf rushed to help, chopping the roots with knives and dragging the probe away before he became fertilizer. After a brief argument, they drove Fondue forward again. He checked a ditch. The group crossed it, but then a sniper trap was triggered. The squad came under fire. Fleeing the bullets, the stalkers burst into the nearest residential building, knocking over a zombie that got in their way. Inside, in a room with a piano and a chandelier, Ricochet chewed Fondue out for opening fire in a panic and unmasking the group. The American, Gates, quickly assembled his sniper rifle and took up a position. He needed Fondue as bait again. The probe was forced to climb out the window and run toward a toppled phone booth. As soon as the boy appeared on the street, a Freedom sniper fired, wounding him in the shoulder. Gates instantly tracked the flash and took out the shooter. Fondue, zigzagging, ran on, drawing fire from other snipers. Gates fought a duel, picking off enemies, but one of the shooters was faster. A bullet hit Fondue in the chest when he was 2 steps from cover. The probe died on the spot. Wasting no time, the group jumped out of the windows and dashed to the phone booth, leaving the corpse lying on the asphalt. The squad advanced deeper into the city. The zombies, which had been numerous during the day, had vanished somewhere. The streets seemed deserted. Gates warned that the snipers were deliberately herding them toward the central square, where the main slaughter was prepared. At an intersection, the group was caught in a crossfire. Shrek was hit in the side, but his body armor held. Rounding a corner, Guppy butt-stroked a motionless zombie at full run. The corpse turned out to be hard as stone, and the rifle stock snapped, lodging in its chest cavity. Suddenly, the sleeping zombies, standing all along the street like statues, came to life. The one Guppy had struck pulled the broken weapon from its chest, sniffed it, and grabbed the stalker by the throat. Guppy shot it point blank, and Werewolf smashed the corpse's head in with his shotgun butt. The street instantly filled with a crowd of revived, rotting dead, advancing like a wall and forcing the humans out onto the exposed intersection. There was nowhere to retreat, so the group surged forward toward the square. Snipers on the roofs continued to fire, driving them into the trap. One bullet smashed Guppy's rifle, and he was forced to drop the useless iron and draw his pistols. Werewolf lobbed a grenade into a sniper's window, clearing the path. Bursting onto the square with its board of honor and toppled Lenin statue, the Stalkers saw it was packed with thousands of aggressive zombies fighting and devouring each other. Sensing the living, the entire mass of dead turned and moved on the small squad. Werewolf and Shrek began hurling grenades. Guppy caught the rifle of the late Fondue thrown to him and opened fire. The group decided to break through to the city council building on the other side of the square, the only place with sturdy doors. A bloody meat grinder ensued. Guppy and Werewolf took point, literally hacking their way through the bodies, firing point blank, smashing skulls with rifle butts, using shotguns. The Americans and Monolith fighters covered the flanks and rear. Chunks of flesh flew through the air, black blood sprayed, and zombies grabbed the runners by their legs. For Guppy, time compressed into an endless cycle of changing magazines and shooting as they fought their way through this hell toward the saving doors.